Welcome to question period in the Alberta Legislature. My name is David Carter, Speaker of the House and MLA for Calgary, Egmont. On this Wednesday afternoon during question period, I'm quite certain that there will be a fair number of catcalls and banter throughout the House in the wake of the results of the Manitoba election. After question period today, the House will be continuing to deal with budgetary estimates. 18 departments have been examined so far, and this afternoon the Executive Council estimates will be dealt with by the whole Assembly. Tomorrow afternoon, after the House adjourns, there will be a very special ceremony of historic importance over at Mackay Avenue School, which will deal with the reenactment of the first legislature in this province.
Alberta. Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to present the following petition that has been received for a private bill. The petition of the Calgary Municipal Heritage Properties Authority for the Calgary Municipal Heritage Properties Authority Amendment Act 1988.
Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees.
Mr. Speaker, with respect to the petition of Laverne Erickson, Terence Schlinker, Wesley Wickerink, Douglas Madge, Gordon Cousins, and Raymond Schultz for Bill PR 8, Rosebud School of the Arts Act, the advertising was completed 10 days after the deadline, and the Private Bills Committee requests that the deadline be extended to permit the petition to be dealt with, and I request the concurrence of the Assembly in this report.
Does the Assembly concur in the request? Opposed? Carried.
Notices of motion. Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports. Introduction of special guests.
Member for Edmonton Avonmore, followed by Calgary Northwest.
Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure to introduce to you and through you to the members of this Assembly 33 grade 6 students from Malcolm Tweddle School in the beautiful constituency of Edmonton Avonmore. They are seated in the members and public gallery, and they are accompanied by their teachers, Miss Gloria Kelly, and parents, Ms. Heather Wallace. I would ask that they stand and receive the warm welcome of this Assembly.
Calgary Northwest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my privilege to introduce to you and through you and to the members of the Assembly another group of very bright, cheerful students from Fred Edward Osborne Junior High School in the constituency of Calgary Northwest. They are here today with their teachers, Mrs. Dawn Jones, Mr. Dale Martin, and Mr. George Strakis. They're sitting in the members and public gallery. I'd ask that they would now rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of the Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, one of the more insidious aspects of the government's new labor code is a provision requiring working people who have joined a union for the purpose of bargaining with their employer to be subjected to a further election process in which the boss has an opportunity to break the union before bargaining can begin. Mr. Speaker, this particular provision is an import from the United States, where it has had the effect of keeping unions out of a majority of work sites even after a majority of workers have joined the union. My question to the Premier: will the Premier advise why this Americanization of our system is an attempt to fall in line with the Mulroney-Reagan trade deal in labor relations?
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to repeat what I said to the honourable member yesterday. He has concerns about the labor legislation and he desires to change any parts of it or ask questions about it, the House sets aside a considerable amount of time for that, and I suggest that he use that time and see if he can convince the House that changes need to be made.
Mr. Speaker, why don't we use this time in question period, which is meant to answer questions? Now, Mr. Premier, to follow up, Mr. Speaker, Professor Elaine Noel points out that the effect of this law in the United States has been to reduce the success rate among newly created unions who have signed up a majority of the workers from 70 or 80% to less than half. My question to the Premier, is this the result the Premier intends for Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, as I said yesterday, the government intends to make sure that the labour legislation provides an equal opportunity for both management and labour to negotiate contracts between themselves, because that's where the responsibility is, and the legislation is intended to make sure that that opportunity is given. Again, the honourable member feels like rather than expressing his own views, that he expresses the views of some professor somewhere. That's really not the business of the House. He should express his own views and see if he can convince the members of the legislature.
Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the Premier may think he can hide, but he can't. And this is the place to answer the questions before that bill comes in. And my question is, knowing clearly what's happened in the United States, and I want to ask the Premier, is it the attempt to balance the labor laws on the side of management? Is this what this government is doing as we move into the Mulroney trade deal? Is this the purpose?
That's right.
Mr. Speaker, just dealt with the question. The intent of the legislation is. I've just explained it to the honourable member, invited him to participate fully in the debate on the bill, ask all the questions he would like. I think it's a wonderful form of parliamentary democracy that we provide that opportunity in the way of handling bills. And I invite him and all of his members of his caucus to participate as fully as possible.
Mr. Speaker, we're not sure the Premier will be here, but I remind him about the Medicare bill when we tried to bring it out in question bit. But maybe he'll try to get an answer from the Minister of Labour. The Minister of Labour is surely aware, if the Premier isn't, that this has had the effect of setting up a whole new business of consultants that sole job is to crush you.
Question, please.
Question is this the reason that we're bringing this in so we can crush the labour movement through consultants through the Mulroney trade deal?
That's right.
Mr. Speaker, I was under the understanding that the Legislative Assembly provided certain research funds to the NDP opposition caucus. Yesterday they were talking about something that was put forward by the Dean of Law. Today he is talking about something put forward in a letter by a professor in the Department of Political Science at the University of Alberta. I didn't know the purpose of the University of Alberta was to provide research services for the NDP caucus. If the honourable member would read section 31(3), sub 3, he'll find the answer there to the question he's asking.
Thank you. Supplementary, Edmonton Goldbar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister of Labour then explain to the House how this particular section creates a level playing field or a fair environment for all parties? Just tell us how it works.
Well, I don't mind anticipating debate on occasion, but this is getting monotonous. The situation is that the directions are there for the Labour Relations Board to hold the vote as soon as possible. Surely if one is trying to avoid coercion, browbeating and other mechanisms to influence the decision, the best way is to have a secret ballot. It's called democracy, and it's the way that this country works and this province works.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, hope springs eternal. We'll continue in question period, but I'd like to designate my second question to the member from Edmonton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, easy. Down there's some soft ones today to the Minister. Mr. Speaker, the mixed messages that emanate from the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care with respect to funding the 128 acute care hospitals in this province is entirely unacceptable. On the one hand, the Minister has said over the last few days that a 2.2% increase is all that they can expect, and they must whittle down even further the staff and beds to stay within that budget. On the other hand, the minister has said, and I quote from yesterday, "Let us know what your concerns and your problems are without reducing any services or closing beds, and we'll take a look at that." Well, what's it going to be, Mr. Minister? Is the 2.2% the bottom line for negotiations with hospital boards or just the starting line for negotiations?
Mr. Speaker, that's the same question that was asked yesterday, and I would give the same answer.
A sharp mind would have noted the difference there,
I can
Mark.
appreciate the minister trying to hide from these questions, too, because what's happened is, and what is the minister's response to the number of hospital boards who are already saying that they have sharpened their pencils, that the fat is gone, they are as lean and mean as they can be, and they will still need a 5.9 or 6% increase this year, either to close beds or to break even. What's the minister's response to those who are already on the record saying that?
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, the same answers that I gave yesterday are valid.
I mean, the same non-answers you didn't give.
Well, so is the minister then saying today, and giving his assurance in the House, that the staff in hospitals will also receive a 4% raise, as the registered nurses have, that there will be no bed closures in hospitals this year, and that no hospital will run a deficit as a result of the budget from his department to their hospitals?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is now getting into a new area, talking about other staff salary settlements in the hospital sector, and in fact, as far as I'm aware, the Alberta Hospital Association and about 4 other union bargaining representatives that are involved have not yet finalized the settlements for those unions for the coming year. So it's not yet known what the cost will actually be.
Well, it's not yet known how cooperative the minister is going to be either. To the Premier, will the Premier instruct this current Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care to develop a relationship with hospital boards that used to exist under previous ministers of hospitals, whereby the boards knew and agreed to in advance with the department what their programs would be, what their staffing levels and bed allocations would be, and have that agreed to in advance, instead of this irrational method of erratic funding and strikes at the 11th hour in our precious...
Thank you, honourable member. Supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, frankly, the consultation process has been exhaustive with the hospitals. I might point out to the honourable member, somebody, Mr. Speaker, has to have some concern for the taxpayers of this province. And the honourable member, I guess, would have the taxpayers borrowing money in Europe, borrowing money in the United States, borrowing dollars, making sure that they just load more and more expenditures on the taxpayers. When the minister says, let's try and find some efficiencies, the NDP merely brushes off such things as trying to help the taxpayers and says, spend, spend, spend. Well, that's their style.
Edmonton Gold Bar and a supplementary or main question?
To the minister, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, of course, taxpayers want access and quality in health care. That's what they want. To the minister, is the minister's real objective here to force bed closures in acute care? Has he made a unilateral decision that this is the only way to achieve efficiency?
Mr. Speaker, again, yesterday I did spend considerable time discussing the matter of what I was hopeful hospitals would be able to do, but I will go over it once more. The hospitals are in a position at the present time where they know what their salary settlements are with respect to the nurses, but not with respect to a number of other employees that they have, which are a significant part of their operations. They also have a reasonably good idea at this point in time what their costs will be for supplies and services over the course of the next year. It's only last week that they were advised officially by our department of the exact budgetary dollars which we have made available, and that included the 1.5% announced in January, plus an additional amount to bring their salary settlements on the nurses up to 4%. We've now asked them to analyze that budget and tell us whether or not they can make it through the year without closing any beds and without reducing any services. because they don't know their final costs in a number of other areas. It's going to be difficult for them to give us accurate figures in that regard right away, but I'm hopeful of getting them fairly soon. After we've had all of that information, we'll be meeting with various hospitals and trying to make sure that there's no way that they do have to close beds or reduce services, because we don't want that to occur.
Main question for the Liberal caucus.
May I designate the first question from the Liberal caucus to Calgary Buffalo?
Yes, this is to the Premier, Mr. Speaker. The announcement of a proposed $2 billion petrochemical development near Red Deer is indeed welcome news. However, it's troubling that a large part of our petrochemical plans are based on a government ethanol policy of August 21st, 1987, which I have here, which bestows special benefits on a company on whose board the Premier sat and whose plane was made quickly available to help the Premier on a recent personal emergency. Nova's benefit is at the expense of natural gas producers who are upset, and rightly so. On what free enterprise basis does the Premier justify his policy which would require producers to make ethanol available to Nova petrochemical plants at less than the fair market value of the ethanol? Why aren't the producers entitled to fair market value?
I gather, Mr. Speaker, that the honourable member means ethane, does he? Ethane. Yes, Mr. Speaker. We do not have an ethanol policy for petrochemical producers. But, Mr. Speaker, the government is determined that there will be processing of Alberta natural resource products within this province. I understand the honourable member's position, and that is that you would have the upgrading plants built outside of Alberta, probably in Ontario, probably in the United States, and that, in fact, you would then ship the jobs down the pipeline and have others benefit from Alberta's resources and the upgrading of those resources. That is not our position. We will do everything possible to have Alberta's resources upgraded in this province so that the jobs are here for Albertans.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Premier promotes free trade and a free market philosophy, yet its policy wimpishly requires a subsidy to petrochemical producers. I'm wondering how the Premier intends to answer complaints from U.S. competitors that Nova's ethylene exports are unfair subsidies under the free trade agreement.
I gather, Mr. Speaker, we won't have to hear from the U.S. companies. We're getting it from the spokesman of theirs, I guess, a member for Calgary Buffalo.
Well, it sounds to me like we're acting like wimps, Mr. Speaker. The government's policy is allegedly based on a 1975 undertaking to Alberta Gas Ethylene, but no written evidence of this undertaking has ever been provided. Now, will the Premier tell this House what agreement, if any, was made in 1975 or any time with Alberta Gas Ethylene, and will he make it public so that the people of this province can see what our policy really is?
Mr. Speaker, I spelt out the policy in answering the first question. That is that Alberta's resources will be upgraded to the greatest extent possible within this province. We will not ship jobs down a pipeline to some other part of the country or into the United States.
Obviously, regardless of a free trade agreement or no free trade agreement. Now, the Energy Resources Conservation Board report on this issue has been in the hands of the government, apparently, for the past week. Natural gas producers don't have a copy. Has one been provided to Nova through Alberta Gas Ethylene Corporation, yes or no?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I assume when the Energy Resources Conservation Board's report is public, we will all get it. As far as Alberta Gas Ethylene sending it to Nova, that seems strange because Nova owns Alberta Gas Ethylene.
Member for Lacombe. Lacombe.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. With Nova's announcement of 2,000 jobs through the construction period and 500 permanent jobs, it certainly indicates that it is creating jobs and saving them here in Alberta The member from Calgary Buffalo seems to be against that. We're for it in central Alberta. However, my question to the Premier, what additional spin-offs to businesses can we expect from such a major construction project here in central Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member anticipates, that it shows that the policy is working and working very positively to the best interests of Albertans. And the fact that this is also an upgrading of natural resources is a further diversification effort. Also, the fact that it is located in central Alberta, it is a decentralization feature also in our province. I think, Mr. Speaker, that the huge number of jobs that will be provided in the ethylene project are only the start, because the ethylene then is a building block for many, many more petrochemical projects, as we have seen from the original two plants. And it's hard for me to understand why the member for Calgary-Buffalo would be so anti this kind of development in the best interest of the people of Alberta.
To the Minister of Energy, given that no one wants to see the processing of primary products removed from the province, what steps or alternatives is the government proposing to deal with the legitimate grievances of smaller producers in the province with respect to this ethane policy?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable member knows the answer to that question. The ERCB has had hearings over the last few years with respect to the construction of upstream field plants, and those hearings have been difficult hearings because there's been such divided views between the petrochemical industry and the producers. And so we established a policy. We sent that policy to the ERCB and asked the ERCB to consult with industry. They had hearings. They heard both sides. We have received the report from the ERCB, and I intend to make it public next week so everybody will know the results.
Member for Little Bow, followed by Drumheller, Edmonton Calder, Edmonton Meadowlark.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Provincial Treasurer. Professor Manzel of the University of Calgary has done a study with regards to the distribution of federal fiscal balances between the federal government and the provinces of Canada. And it's noted in there that various expenditures and contributions by the various provinces. One note, for example, is Alberta had a net contribution of $2.95 billion in the year 1985, whereas Ontario received some $4.3 billion. Could the Provincial Treasurer indicate whether the government has finalized their study with regards to this and that their figures show the very same type of imbalance at the present time?
Mr. Speaker, I don't know that the government has undertaken a study which would either deny or replicate what Professor Mansell has done, but I think this government from time to time has expressed a similar sentiment about the way in which the Fiscal Federation in particular operates and its impact on Alberta. And I think my colleagues from time to time have made some fairly glowing speeches about the troublesome aspects of the way in which central dollars are redistributed back into Alberta. Nonetheless, we have taken the position, Mr. Speaker, that we are members of Canada. We have to make our contribution in a variety of ways. We continue to support the equalization concept, which is entrenched in the Constitution in November of 1981. And we tend to feel that in these kinds of relationships, it isn't all equity and fairness that you have to be a contributor, and to some extent you have to ask what is due to you. It's on that last point, Mr. Speaker, that I should underline the fact that in the budget address, we indicated that Alberta is making a claim for stabilization under the established program financing arrangement, and we expect that, as we have done in the past, to pay our fair share, that in fact the central government in this case should pay their fair share. We hope that will be the mandate.
Speaker, supplementary to the Minister with regards to the revenue stabilization provisions. Could the Minister indicate what progress has been made on that and what steps the Minister is taking to gain as much equity as possible for Alberta in this confederation?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, as I've said before, we are pursuing this claim with some vigor. We believe that the transfers which the province have made to Canada over the past decade both in terms of equalization and in terms of reducing the price of oil below the world price, for example, have made major contributions to the economic prosperity of this country. But at this time, because of the substantial reduction in the price of oil and gas in 1986, that claim is now being investigated with all the effort and strength of two departments of Treasury and Energy. We have just about concluded our calculations. I think the real test is going to be to convince the federal bureaucrats, I suppose, that in fact the claim is legitimate, to explain why the claim is necessary, and then, as I've said before, to get the politicians to yes.
Speaker, supplementary question to the Minister. Professor Mansell's table indicates that since 1961 to 1985, Alberta has contributed some $100 billion, whereas Ontario during that same period of time has received has given a total of $17 billion, and Quebec has received some $91 billion, which seems to be very inequitable. Could the Minister indicate whether the current financial condition of Alberta at this point in time warrants greater consideration by the federal government to return of some of those dollars and a reversal of that trend that has been historic since 1961?
I'm sure we'd like to reverse the trend. I know during the energy debate, the leader of the government and several ministers, of course, made fairly strong statements about the contribution the province has made to the rest of Canada on the National Energy Program. I won't get into the rhetoric of the National Energy Program, except to say that that program certainly confiscated dollars from Alberta and redistributed those dollars back into the central treasury for redistribution to other parts of Canada. That's a fact. I think we agree that the numbers are large, but Alberta continues to maintain its position with respect to equalization. That is, that if you have a have-not province, that it must be able to receive services at a reasonable tax regime similar to other provinces, and that's why we support the notion of equalization, and that's why for some only distant time, perhaps the member remembered better than I, that Alberta has not benefited under equalization. But we are doing all that we can to adjust these circumstances. I think the Western Development Opportunities Fund is one, perhaps not quite enough money, but certainly it is symbolic in its attempt to address some of these situations. But nonetheless, I think the strength and vigor of this province comes from its attitude towards private sector investment, to develop the strengths we have in our resources, and to get on with making Alberta a prosperous province, and that's essentially our objective.
Mr. Final supplementary to the Premier, Mr. Speaker. As one of the instruments that possibly could be used would be the Western First Ministers Conference. Would the Premier see that as this being an item on the agenda for discussion and gaining the support of the other three provinces as such?
Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable member makes a good suggestion, and it will be an opportunity for me to discuss this matter and receive the support of Western premiers. I might also point out that due to efforts of the Alberta government, we now have the matter of First Ministers meetings on an annual basis established both in custom and in the Meech Lake Accord, and we would use that opportunity as well, because now that is no longer at the whim of the federal government, but is established. And it also provides an excellent opportunity to follow through on the suggestion the honourable member makes.
Okay. Member for Edmonton Meadowlark. I'm sorry, Edmonton Gold Bar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Didn't see him. Mr. Speaker, to the Treasurer, fairness is one thing, but we all know that timing is everything. With a federal election on the horizon, can the Minister give us his timeline regarding the claim so that there can be some assurance to the House on our submissions and a commitment from the federal government in the near future?
Mr. Speaker, simply to advise the member that the process is now started. We are firming our calculations. My understanding of the relationship or the section of the established program financing is that the federal government does not have to initiate payments before the end of 1989. But realizing the importance of this claim to Albertans and recognizing that many things are done at different stages of the political cycle, I'll accept the advice of the member and keep my eye on that timetable.
Okay, member for Calgary Mountain View.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, Alberta, with about 9% of Canada's population, received only 1.5% of the money that the federal government spent on regional development. What will the Premier do prior to the next meeting of the premiers of the country? What steps is he going to take to have this imbalance corrected?
Well, Mr. Speaker, again, the opportunities that I outlined to the honourable member from Little Bow are excellent opportunities. I suppose we will also have now the opportunity to welcome another progressive conservative premier to the circle. And I anticipate, Mr. Speaker, that he will be as concerned for Western and provincial rights and not as caught up in the old idea of big government being best in Ottawa and Ottawa telling everybody what to do.
Centralizing. Member for Drumheller, followed by Edmonton Calder, Edmonton Meadowlark, Dunvegan, and Edmonton Millwoods.
Mr. Speaker, my question today is for the Minister of Community and Occupational Health and concerns a very serious problem in our society. Suicide and related mental illness is much more widespread than many of us would think, and 1 out of 3 people will at one time during their lives suffer from some form of mental illness. In view of this, could the Minister inform the House what his department is doing with respect to the prevention of suicide?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it is a tragedy that this government is deeply concerned with, and we've taken action by putting together a program that is, I know the opposition doesn't like to hear this, but is a program that is unique in Canada, and it provides funding to communities for education, for bereavement programs, for distress lines, and for coordination of suicide prevention efforts in a number of centres, including Grand Prairie, Fort McMurray, St. Paul, Edmonton, Red Deer, Calgary, Lethbridge, and Medicine Hat.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, could the Minister detail how those programs are delivered? Does the Department provide the services directly, or are volunteer societies and private organizations employed?
Mr. Speaker, I believe that is the program's main strength, is that it is delivered by individuals, primarily volunteers within each of those communities. We, through the Suicide Prevention Provincial Advisory Committee, grant dollars to groups that are interagency groups, so we ensure that there is a coordinated effort amongst all of the caregivers and the groups within each of those communities to make sure that volunteers are properly coordinated and properly equipped to go about their duties of attempting to prevent suicides and ensure that members of the community, including teachers in schools and physicians within the community, are aware of the signs and the symptoms to put out an early warning, an early check on those who might be thinking of attempting suicide.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, could the Minister tell the House how these suicide prevention programs will be impacted by the social policy statement, caring and responsibility?
Mr. Speaker, it's an excellent point, because when the Deputy Premier released the Caring and Responsibility paper, a statement of social policy for Alberta just last week, I looked at the paper as to how it reflected and how our programs stood up against that paper. And quite in keeping with the paper, our suicide prevention program focuses foursquare on the themes of individual self-reliance, on the notion of family, the importance of family as a fundamental value in our society, certainly on our historical traditions of volunteerism, community-driven programs, and basically the objective of the program is to help achieve self-sufficiency and independence for all Albertans.
Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Education. Could the Minister tell the House if the Alberta curriculum deals with the issues of mental illness and suicide.
Mr. Speaker, members will recall that in July of 1987, the member for Olds Didsbury brought forward a motion to this Assembly urging that the issue of suicide be dealt with more thoroughly in the curriculum than it was. As a result of that motion, we now have a junior health and personal life skills program which does address the suicide issue, a curriculum guide outlining some of the myths about suicide, and then it's continued on into the career and life management required curriculum in the senior high level, where we address more the issues of self-image, of the frustrations that young people face in their daily living and how to cope with those frustrations. Further, we have put out in the last several months a teacher's manual for dealing with the issue within the classroom, which has been lauded by both junior high and senior high school teachers as an excellent resource document to deal with this very difficult problem.
Member for Edmonton Goldbar, followed by Edmonton Avonmore.
Supplementary to the Minister of Community and Occupational Health, Mr. Speaker, this tragic situation of depression and hopelessness and suicide is particularly prevalent in Native communities. Will the Minister tell us if and how this problem is being addressed that affects extraordinary losses, particularly among teenagers?
It is a concern in the Native communities, Mr. Speaker, and we have been working with a number of reserves in the province through our provincial suicidologist to attempt to work with them to put in place programs on reserves. And most recently, in cooperation with the federal government, who has provided most of the funding for a program at one of our reserves just outside of Edmonton. This is something that we're doing basically a test study, a pilot study, to make sure that the band council, working with a worker in the community, has the resources, has the tools to get the word out in the community and to prevent these tragedies from occurring, especially amongst our Native young people.
Edmonton Avonmore.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, in light of a 2.5% cut in funding, how can the Minister assure us that people in rural, isolated areas will have access to a toll-free, anonymous crisis line that can direct them to the services that they need? Because one that is suicidal needs more than a crisis line. They need treatment and counseling to deal with the depression and the despair that they feel. So what commitment does he make to both?
Thank you, Honourable Member. The supplementary has been asked. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I want to clarify the Honourable Member's beginning of her question. There is, in fact, a 3.6% increase in our suicide prevention program under Vote For in our departmental budget. The Honourable Member raised this question during the discussion of my department's estimates, and Mr. Speaker, my concern with a province-wide toll line, although it is a laudable objective and one that I hope we'll achieve someday, what's even more important is to make sure that the community network is in place such that when that person in distress gets off the phone and still suffers from the problems that are causing him or her distress, that they will be able to go to community workers, to go to community resources, community agencies, to get the ongoing support that they need. And that is our objective, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that those services are put in place in those communities before there is such a province-wide line.
Edmonton Calder.
Mr. Speaker, my questions today are to the Minister of Social Services. Yesterday, I had hoped that the Minister of Social Services would reassure Albertans that her department would not reduce its role in private adoptions. Instead of giving that assurance, the Minister repeated her assertion that any changes would be in the best interests of the child. Although the Minister is finally moving to introduce regulations into the private adoption area, the report that I am now filing by the department's legislative planner, Bert Walter, proves the department is considering withdrawing from many of the services it now provides. Will the Minister explain how withdrawing important public services indicated in this report could possibly be considered in the best interests of the child?
Mr. Speaker, I am aware that the honourable member has a document which apparently was used as a discussion tool for a legislative planner from the Department of Social Services in a public meeting, I might add. And, Mr. Speaker, there are some 5,000 plus people work for the Department of Social Services. I sincerely hope that many of them will be putting together ideas that come forward to the Minister's office, but it does not necessarily reflect the Minister's view.
So, supplementary to the Minister then, is she saying that the recommendations in this particular report will not be used as her amendments when she comes out with her legislation?
Mr. Speaker, to get into a discussion about what the amendments will, what form they will take is not appropriate for question period, because obviously the honourable member could discuss the honourable member, to be fair, should also bring forward the report of the committee that travelled the province and sought the views of all Albertans on this very important matter, and many other discussion documents.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. We'll continue when there's quiet in the House. Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I only wanted for the House to note that there are many, many documents that have surfaced with respect to this issue. Very importantly, it is an expression of opinion from many Albertans, including the Department of Social Services employees. And, Mr. Speaker, I can assure the honourable member she'll have a lot of opportunity to discuss that legislation when it comes forward.
Mr. Speaker, the committee's report came out in 1986. This particular report came out in 1988. Supplementary to the Minister, will the Minister explain how having lawyers bargaining for babies in hospital parking lots on behalf of their clients, a situation that is outlined in this particular report, will she explain how her legislation will prevent this from happening?
Mr. Speaker, the outline of a situation that the honourable member has just described that allegedly has taken place is certainly not in the best interest of the child, and therefore, given my comments on the 2 previous days in question period, obviously would not happen in legislation.
Third supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Given then that this report, and I'm asking for assurances by the Minister, given that this report indicates that people assessing the suitability of prospective adoptive parents would be the same people who have financial interest in placing adopted children, does the Minister consider this to be a conflict of interest which could lead to place some children at risk?
Mr. Speaker, once again, the honourable member has framed in her own mind what legislation may look like, and the honourable member will be able to see the legislation and discuss it when it is put forward.
Honourable member, this is not discussion time. There's been 3 supplementaries, table officers. Chair recognizes Edmonton Meadowlark on the main question. Supplementary Calgary Buffalo, thank you, with alacrity.
Thank you. To the Minister, we'd simply like to know that low-income Albertans will have an equal opportunity to adopt babies, and that those with money will not have special benefits and advantages. That's the heart of the matter, and can the Minister give us this assurance?
Mr. Speaker, once again, that will be a matter of discussion with respect to the legislation when it comes forward, but I can assure the honourable member that this government is trying hard, very hard, within the context of assuring the long-term security of the child, to give the parents of a child and adoptive parents options.
Member for Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Edmonton Higher Student Office opened today, Mr. Speaker, with hundreds of students lined up, many of them who had been doing that overnight. What is clear, Mr. Speaker, is that students want to work, but that their options and opportunities are awfully limited at this time, with a youth unemployment rate in this province of 15.2%. The Alberta Wage Subsidy Program used to be available to employers wanting to hire summer students at a subsidized wage rate. To the Minister of Career Development and Employment, will the Minister please explain why this program is no longer available to students?
Mr. Speaker, the wage subsidy program is available to students.
Oops.
To the Minister of Labour, will the Minister make the announced minimum wage increases effective immediately so that thousands of students across Alberta can earn enough money this summer to pay for their post-secondary education next year?
Mr. Speaker, I've already made public the reasons for setting the 1st of September as the date for implementation.
To the Minister of Economic Development and Trade, will the Minister consider setting up small business consultants in higher students' offices across Alberta to facilitate students wanting to set up their own business during the summer?
Mr. Speaker, we've got a very effective program that is offered through the Alberta Opportunity Corps that provides financing for start-up student businesses. Also, the Federal Business Development Bank provides a similar program. And also through the incubator programs in Edmonton and Calgary, there is support to young budding entrepreneurs, and I would join, I'm sure, with all members in the Assembly to encourage students who have that entrepreneurial inclination to start up their own businesses during the summer and access the programs that are available to them.
To the Minister of Career Development and Employment, why are so many STEP positions allocated to government and so few to business?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm really disappointed in the research that the honourable member's done. He should know that the wage subsidy program is in fact available to students through the summer, and that in fact the wage subsidy program is for the private sector. For the public sector and for non-profit organizations, we have the Summer Temporary Employment Program. That budget this year, Mr. Speaker, is $20 million. It was $20 million last year. We had more students employed last summer than in the history of this province, so I believe the program works well. I had the opportunity to open the Hire a Student office in Lethbridge this week, much to the satisfaction of the members for Lethbridge East and West. And I can tell you that it is a very fine program. It is one of the oldest programs in this department, the Summer Temporary Employment Program, and we will continue to be sure that it works to the satisfaction of summer students who are wanting a summer job. With regard to the member's comment to the Minister of Labour, Mr. Speaker, the Summer Temporary Employment Program and summer jobs are for young people not only to assist them in supplementing their educational costs, but also gives them the opportunity in many cases for their first job. I'm sure the honourable member recognizes and recalls the importance of his first job in terms of learning discipline and the experience that you get with your job, working with people, and certainly the program covers all of those areas.
Supplementary, Edmonton Belmont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Career Development and Employment, processing applications has been retarded due to government cuts in that department, and I'm advised as of last week that that rate at the moment they're at 6 weeks behind in processing the applications. I wonder what plans the Minister has, if any, to increase the staff at the Programs Office to process those very applications that are so important to students.
Mr. Speaker, we have a very active time of year. As the STEP program kicks off at the beginning of April, it is a very intensive period for us, and we bring resources not only from our employment programs, but the non-profit ones, but also from people who work generally in the wage subsidy area to assist in the processing of those applications. We do our very best in the department to assist in processing those applications, and Mr. Speaker, the honourable member may know something I don't. I doubt it, but I don't know that there has been any reduction in staff assisting in processing in the Summer Temporary Employment Program.
Time for question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions, if there are indeed any supplementaries, and also for the Minister of Energy to give supplementary information with respect to a question raised by Calgary Forest Lawn. Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Any additional supplementaries on this issue? Minister of Energy.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to follow up my response earlier to the question from the member from Forest Lawn, in that when the ERCB ethane report is released next week, the follow-up would be consultation with both the petrochemical industry and the producers in this province to get feedback from those people with respect to the recommendations from that report. I want to emphasize that the report was for recommendations to come to the government, and following those consultations, government would make the final decision on how we will see future petrochemical plants develop in this province.
Calgary Forest Lawn.
Mr. Speaker, will those recommendations be coming before the Assembly for debate in any way, either by way of a motion or a bill or to change to existing acts?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member, when the report becomes public, is free to do whatever he wants with it. He wants to put a motion on the order paper. I'm sure he can do so.
Orders of the day. Might we have unanimous consent to revert briefly to the introduction of special guests? Opposed? Carried. Thank you, Minister of Public Works Supply.